was less than a month into third year, the first time I had a patient die. I'll call her Deborah. To be fair, Deborah wasn't my first patient that died, but she was the first that I had felt was my patient. I had been with her as she was admitted to the hospital and cared for her over her almost 2 weeks with us. She was very sick, even from the first time I saw her, lying in her hospital bed lethargic, unable to answer my questions. Eyes jaundiced, as yellow as the mustardy bed curtains surrounding her. Abdomen swollen with massive ascites, all from her liver mets. I knew from that moment I met her that she likely only had weeks or months to live. So I resolved to provide for her the most compassionate end-of-life care, as free from suffering as possible. I held her hand and spoke to her in a soft voice every morning when I went to go see her. I made sure to explain what we were doing every step of the way, even though I wasn't sure she could hear or understand me, even as she drifted between barely conscious and unconscious. I learned who she was from her family and friends. Deborah was a nurse of almost 30 years. Her coworkers told me stories of how she treated her patients like family, how she cared for them, and how she fought for them. I hope she felt a little bit of that from me. Her cousin, a fellow nurse, told me stories of the type of leader Deborah was. She was their nurse manager, and she truly embodied the phrase, lead by example. The cousin also told me a story from when she and Deborah were young, at Deborah's first communion. That day, 7-year-old Deborah told a fully grown adult man to go home and change because he wasn't dressed sharply enough. And he did. Even from such a young age, Deborah could command a room. She was truly a force to be reckoned with. The morning before Deborah died, I spent an hour sitting with her family, listening to them tell stories about her. I learned that she was kind and strong and funny and an all-around incredible human. I left that day with love in my heart for Deborah, hoping I had been able to provide Deborah and her family the space they needed. When I found out later that night that Deborah had passed, I was able to think of the incredible person her family had described to me. And in my own way, celebrate the life she had lived. A couple weeks later was the first time I watched a patient die. I was eating lunch in the team room when my team was paged for a code. I felt my heart rate pick up as we raced up the stairs and down the hall to the patient's room. 521B. The room was already filled with people. It was chaos. I nervously got in line to do chest compressions. I had never done them before and stepped up when it was my turn. This was nothing like practicing on a mannequin. Drops of blood were flying as each thrust aerosolized the patient's breath. I was bending at the hips, pushing deep, just focusing on my rhythm, 100 beats per minute. Push, 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 push. Until the time came when the team leader told me to stop. When I stopped my compressions, we did not switch over to another person. We did not push another milligram of epi. we stopped bagging him. The team leader called time of death, and he held a moment of silence for the patient. As I was catching my breath, I started to think of Deborah. And I wanted to know who this man lying in the bed in front of me was. I didn't even know his name. I left that room incredibly exhausted. Performing chest compressions is truly draining, both physically and mentally. My arms were sore the next day, and over the next week, my thoughts sometimes drifted to the man in 521B. And I considered looking him up on Epic. Who was he? What had he been in the hospital for? What had his life been like? Did he have family? Loved ones? Who was mourning his loss? Was someone mourning his loss? But I never did look him up. I guess I just figured it would be more difficult if I knew more about him. I still hope the end of his life was peaceful. Or as peaceful as it could have been. Surrounded by 20 strangers, one barking orders, and some medical student pounding on his chest. Around the same time, I found out that a mentor, a loved one of mine, was transitioning from chemotherapy and radiation, disease-modifying treatments, to palliative and hospice care. Her name was Kathy. I first met Kathy when I was a freshman in college, and she recruited me to the rugby team. Now, I knew nothing about the sport of rugby, or what a legend in the rugby world Kathy was. All I knew was that I was a scared little freshman in a brand new place, searching for a sense of belonging. Kathy gave me that, and so much more. With rugby, I found a family, and with Kathy, I found a role model, a mentor, and a friend. It is truly impossible to overstate how important Kathy was, and still is. In my second year of medical school, I found out that Kathy had been diagnosed with cancer. Colon cancer, already metastatic to the lungs. I had already taken pathology and GI pathophys, so I knew this meant her prognosis wasn't good. But I still had hope. This was Kathy, after all. Just a couple of years earlier, she was running around at practice, juking us all out. 60 years old, and making a bunch of 20-somethings look like fools on the pitch. Kathy was the pinnacle of health. There were definitely moments when I recognized this cognitive dissonance. If I had a patient presenting with metastatic colon cancer, I would logically know that their prognosis was poor. But not Kathy. Kathy was a force of nature. In my third year, around the same time that I cared for Deborah and the man in 521B, I found out that the radiation and the chemo and the experimental drugs had all failed. And doctors were starting to talk timeline with Kathy. From my knowledge from my palliative care rotation, I knew this wasn't good. We all rushed back to campus, to see Kathy one last time. And 5 days later, she passed. I suppose I'm sharing this to sort out my feelings. And maybe because I need everyone to know how incredible Kathy was. I sometimes even think of her medical team. Did they know who she was? Like, did they ever get to see her goofy side? Like, when she'd set up drills at practice, just to make us look silly, so she could laugh. Or did they ever get to see her dance? Like how she'd play music during practice just to get us all dancing. Like, did they know how much she loved dogs? To the point where she could not walk by one without stopping to say hello. Did they know that the only thing fiercer than one of her tackles was one of her hugs? Did they know how kind and humble she was? How despite her impressive resume, she was never too busy or too important to teach a new player how to pass a ball? Never too busy or too important to have a tea with me, just to chat about rugby, college, life? Did they know how she jumped into my arms the first time I scored a try? Or how she'd always scold me to stop yelling at the refs? Did they know what it felt like to hear Kathy say, "I'm proud of you"? I hope she's proud of me. Did they know how much love Kathy gave to the world and how much she was loved back? I knew all of this and more. And now I find I want to share it. I want you to know all about this incredible woman I am so lucky to have known. I imagine this might be some of what Deborah's family felt in her last weeks and days. This intense desire to make sure that someone we love is remembered long after they're gone. Maybe that's why we tell stories. When I get to tell you about Kathy for just a second, it's like she's still right here. Through a story, I can reach out and touch Kathy, and she can touch my heart again, one last time. And just maybe, she can touch yours too.